Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. It's time for this week's Friday Morning GM with co-host Vasilis Lyrikos of Baltimore Beatdown. Vas, how you doing?
Doing great. The Ravens are number one in DVOA, so I'm feeling good.
It's a good day to be a Ravens fan, that's for sure, coming off that Lions win last week. People are sky high here with the trade deadline coming up and the prospect of Derrick Henry getting flaunted like a big red blanket in front of all of Ravens Twitters in terms of what that means. I think there's a double-edged sword out there. People are A, expecting to get Henry, and B, expecting to get Henry cheap, which is unusual for Ravens fans. They're saying EDC's going to do it. I'm not hearing the give a first and a third kind of thing from a lot of people, probably because they're getting generally rebuked for those kind of overpayment type offers.
Seems to be the consensus is it'll cost a fourth, and that's with Tennessee eating most of his remaining cap hit for this year. There does seem to be a swelling of support for Derrick Henry. I don't necessarily agree with that sentiment, but certainly a name worth discussion.
So we're going to go through some names. We'll pick them through one at a time, and I guess we'll start with Derrick since he's the guy. But take us through your thoughts on Henry. You obviously have prepared some things. I have some too.
Yeah, so he's due about $5 million. So we're going to kind of, I guess, use round numbers, hopefully, since we're kind of trying to estimate the half-season cost of these players. About $5 million.
I think it's 11/18 right now of what they have to do in the season. So I calculated $6.4 million. So, but round numbers are fine. So you're in the ballpark. Yeah.
We're in the ballpark there. I just don't think he gives you that much of an upgrade over Gus Edwards. I think he does have the breakaway speed that Gus does not have. I think Gus is a better short yardage back than Derrick Henry because Henry needs a little bit of that runway to get those feet and those big heavy thighs moving. He has a 45% success rate on the season, which is below Justice and Gus. And I looked it up. Running back's just a dependent position. Henry averaged 4.3 yards per carry in 2021. If you remember, the Ravens had two cast-offs manning their backfield that year. Devontae Freeman also averaged 4.3, and Latavius Murray averaged 4.2. So it's not like you're getting some massive upgrade here. And I would prefer to reserve the cap space and the draft picks for the future seasons or potentially an upgrade somewhere in the trenches.
Yeah, I'm with you. I looked at the $6.4 million and I said, I'm more or less ambivalent at picking up $6.4 million and get Henry if he was given for free. Okay, which would mean, but you could conditional seventh, you could do something that would be roughly in there. The notion of giving up for a fourth for him in 2024, I can't go along with. Not under any circumstances. It's way too much. Even like a fourth for a sixth kind of thing would be, in my opinion, too much, conserving the number of draft picks. The Ravens have a huge raft of free agents leaving, including Edwards and Henry if they pick him up. And it would not make it any easier to fill a lot of spots. The more interesting notion is mortgaging some of the draft capital the Ravens are likely to have in 2025. So if it was a 2025 fourth or fifth, I think I'm on board. Okay. And so you defer to year. I don't know if Tennessee would agree with that, and I don't know how much salary they'd be willing to pick up. But I think I'd start the bidding at a 2025 fifth, go up to the 2025 fourth if they're willing to eat most of the contract. I think that is a concern for the Ravens. I don't like selling draft picks, which that effectively is for cap space. They did it with Roquan. Obviously, it worked out because Roquan is a great player. It didn't work out because of the draft capital they saved. That really, honestly, they overpaid for Roquan relative to the market, not relative to the results, but relative to the market at the time, because they were getting cap relief on the deal, and that's selling draft picks. I really don't like that. But anyway, if it could be a 2025,
on that point, it's the second time if my memory serves correct, that the Ravens have essentially sold draft picks for cap space. The other time was Eugene Monroe when Ozzie added him. I believe that was 2013 or 2014. But I agree with you. I would rather restructure just so we set the table correctly, $2.6 million in space at the moment, $13 million simple restructurable per Brian McFarland. I would prefer to restructure one of those contracts if you have to and take on the full cap hit and save your draft capital. You could go either way, but that would be my preference.
Yeah, some of the question is, where is that money? Now, Brian's very good at doing that. Dan Reese also puts together good numbers on what can be pushed forward, but I believe a lot of that is Ronnie Stanley. And so if they don't know what year Ronnie's last year will be the Ravens, then it'll cost you more to potentially do it that way. So
I think Ronnie's about 7, so about half of that 13 is Ronnie.
Okay, so just like with Marcus Peters, in terms of waiting, I don't know. I don't actually recall if they ended up restructuring Peters or not, but I think they waited and they kept him right for the last year. Mm-hmm. I'd rather have this be a cleaner deal in terms of how the Ravens figure it out. And I think the only way I can see this working is if it's a 2025 draft pick. I wouldn't trade at 24.
And I think that makes sense because hypothetically you're going to receive a comp pick for some of these players that are the mercenary rental types. Mm-hmm. And you're going to, and that comp pick will be deferred. So if you're deferring the year that it comes back, the other note I would make is there are some strings attached to the compensatory pick calculation. First of all, it limits who you can bring in. Second of all, you have a maximum of 4 per year. Yeah. So if you're losing Matabike and Queen and Dobbins and Stone, and then you're also saying, well, we're going to get another third-round comp for whoever else we're going to mention on this list, it may not be that way. So not quite as clean cut as some make it out to be.
So they would gain an additional offset room. So they could have 6-2 in terms of free agents and bring somebody back at a lower level. Honestly, the compensatory pick for Henry probably less than any other player in their top 4 because Kevin Zeitler's in there too. I don't see Henry getting a 3-year, $30 million deal or anything. I see him either maybe taking a 1-year deal next year because he'll be 30 or whatever he is, and I just don't see him being a huge dollar free agent this offseason. I think, you probably maybe something more like what Josh Oliver got last year, 3 years, $21 million might be what Henry gets. And, I think there'll be some strings attached. I do think Henry does give them something in terms of second level breakaway potential that they're not really getting from Gus right now. So if the offensive line has kind of moved back into place, and we had a good game from John Simpson, we had some good qualitative games from Linderbaum has not really been the great run blocker this year. He's been a better pass blocker, which is more valuable, no doubt about it, more valuable. But he's had some problems with run blocking now that have kind of offset some of those gains. If the offense we're going to go to more 12, they want to close out games more. That's a possibility. What do you think about the notion that Edwards goes in return to the Titans?
I haven't looked at the cap ramifications of that. I would assume they would offset a little bit with his base. I wouldn't be against it, and I'm not necessarily 100% adamantly opposed to Derrick Henry as a player. He's a great player, reminiscent of Jamal Lewis. So I think it's just maybe I just think that the idea of there's going to be mountains of green grass for everyone because Derrick Henry's in the backfield now, I don't necessarily buy that. So I think his impact is being a little bit oversold. Potential impact is oversold in the Ravens flock right now.
All right. And would not make the Ravens better in play action, say, than what they have with Gus. If they wanted to, there's honestly some switch in scheme. Lamar, actually turning his back to the field more has not been something that he's always been comfortable doing. So, yeah.
And maybe that entices Monken to feed Henry more because he is a little bit volume dependent. So it's kind of something I want to avoid.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, very good. Let's move on to another player here. And we're gonna jump around a little bit in this, but one of the names that's been pervasive throughout this has been Danielle Hunter of the Vikings, who leads the NFL in sacks right now, I believe. If not, he's very close.
He has 9.
Okay. So, the question is, obviously Minnesota now coming on, and there's a real question as to whether they'll trade a player right now, because it looks like they might be headed for, the possibility of a playoff run this year. So I think it's certainly possible they won't make a deal. It's funny when you look at a service like PFF, Hunter doesn't even grade out, dominantly as a pass rusher this year, despite the fact they haven't charted for 27 pressures. He's got a modest 71 pass rush grade.
So interestingly, 9 sacks, 9 quarterback hits all season, 100% conversion rate, which is probably unsustainable. So he's a good player. He's a very good player. Roughly about $5 million to take on the remainder of his base, plus $1.5 million per game bonus. So that starts adding up pretty quickly. I know there's been some consternation about him not wanting to take a long-term deal. So, but then again, as you mentioned, Minnesota's in position to make the playoffs almost at this point.
He would carry a fairly substantial cost, more so than a player like Henry, because even though they're approximately the same age, Danielle Hunter is going to earn a lot more this offseason. He's going to really get paid again. And edge rushers, as we've seen with the Ravens guys who they've been able to pick up, at the last moment, there's some quality edge rushers that can come past 30 that you can pick up very cheap. So I think the Ravens are probably better off sticking with what they have. I assume for Hunter, I don't even know what it would take to pry him away from the Vikings right now. But I think basically with what the Ravens have done, I'm not really seeing the need to go out and pay for a big edge. I think Odafe is the edge they really needed to put them over the top, and we'll see more from him after a very fine first game. And the other guy that I'm still hopeful for, even though the new no comment on him this week is not good, is Tyus Bowser returning and juicing the pass rush with what he can do in terms of flexibility to drop.
I'm of the same mind. I think the pass rush has been a sum of the parts production and will continue to be so. Ojabo may return at some point as well. So if the Ravens were in a position to they're looking to add a cornerstone piece of their defense, I think I'd be more interested in some of these players, as in this isn't a rental mercenary. This is a player that's going to be extended long term. Mm-hmm. But they're not really in a position to do that. They already have 6 cornerstone contracts on the books. Yeah. So I'm going to go on to but let's knock some of these big names off first. Brian Burns, another player. Apparently Carolina was offered 2 first-round picks last year and declined. So that's surprising. But now he's into his last year of his deal, so do roughly $8 million between now and the remainder of the season. He's a speed rusher, almost in the Ngakoue mold. Definitely a speed rusher, very high, 27% pass rush win rate with a 20% double team rate. So he's having a very good year, although only 4 sacks on his resume thus far. I think he's going to probably net or cost at least a second-round pick, if not for a late first-rounder, or 2 seconds.
2 seconds, wow. Yeah, I mean, first of all, I wouldn't do it. And I don't know what the cap relief situation is like from Carolina. I don't know what sort of situation they're in, if they can eat a bunch of that or not. In terms of, they'd have to convert the rest of the per game bonuses before he was traded, presumably, and take that off the books. Then you're talking about selling draft picks, and we're back to the other discussion about what the Ravens really need in 2024. If the Carolina Panthers are looking to restock the 2025 cupboard, I think there are things the Ravens can do in terms of floating 4th-round picks in particular, because I think they might have a couple from the compensatory system. But I would not see a price as high as 2 seconds or even 2/3 for Brian Burns at this point being realistic.
Yeah, I think he's probably going to go to a team, an up-and-coming young team that has a need for another cornerstone pass rusher they can extend long-term. Mm-hmm. That would be my guess on him. Makes
sense. Okay, well, let's take another big one off the board and look at Saquon Barkley, because to talk about what the Giants had with him, I think has cooled a little bit. Obviously, tough offseason for running backs, but Saquon is a guy that probably has more right now left in the tank, I think, clearly, than Henry. And yet, this has not been a season that I think you'd look at and say, wow, you just have to have this guy. He's been, pretty good, but he hasn't been great this year. And he honestly, in some ways, it's probably his worst season of his career to date. But where are you on him in terms of, first of all, do you want him for this backfield? And second of all, boy, how do you arrive at a cost for a player like this?
Right. I am a little bit more interested in Barkley than Henry. I think because it gives you a lot more in the passing game. The number that stuck out on his season thus far is 45% success rate on receiving plays, on receptions, which is by far the best of his career. He's been banged up. He's always banged up, but roughly $4 million to take on. I would be interested for a cheap price.
Now, this is really interesting, by the way. The Ravens yards per target. I don't have receiving success, but these are going to be closely linked. The Ravens yards per target for running backs this year. Do you know what it is?
Oh, well, including Gus's 80-yarder.
It does include Gus's 80, but we could do the math with him.
Probably in 6 or 7.
Okay, see that 6 or 7 would be okay for a running back. In fact, 7.5 would be really great for a running back. The Ravens right now are at 9.0 for their running backs. But take out the 80, and I think it's let's see, it was 279 yards, so it could be 199 yards on 29 without the big one from Gus, and it's still 6.9, which is pretty good.
Sure.
Hill's been a disappointment, and basically everybody else has been terrific. Dobbins had 5.0 in the first game, but it's also everybody's got like 3. Ricard, of course, had that big one. I'm including him in there. But it's the Ravens have I think it's 4 running backs at 10.0 or higher this year in terms of yards per target, which is crazy.
Monken's really scheming them up.
Yeah,
I think the thing with go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, and maybe if you're finding space for backs to get the ball, maybe Barkley gives you a little bit more on the back end of that. Yeah.
That's what I was going to kind of circling back to that as well. He's a player that'll get the yards on his own. It doesn't have to be schemed up for him when he's out in space. So to me, the way you look at it is, could you upgrade? Could you add 200 players across the league that would make your roster better? Of course. That should be an easy. Well, does he make your team better? Yeah, I think anybody that you're trading for should make your team better. How much better? If you're already at a 99 out of 100 rating on a certain position or a certain aspect of the game, then why are you going to pay up to just add 1% or 5% efficiency?
Yeah, I'm there with you. It's really tough because the Ravens pass rush has been so good, and they need a pass rusher. Come on, because they need a pass rusher, right? Because there's 2 things I hear. One is this is just not going to get it done. The people they have right now. And the second is in the playoffs. Maybe they can do this in the regular season, but they can't possibly do this in the playoffs. So I'm not sure why. I'm really not. They just beat the crap out of the Detroit Lions and sacked them 5 times in a game. It's a and that's a team with a pretty damn good offensive line that they fairly overwhelmed in this game. I think I'd roll the dice with who I got and hope Owe is really the emergent in terms of quick pressures from the outside, even though Clowney and Van Noy have been terrific at it as well.
Agreed. This is a complete team. It's not like previous years where, if you add this wide receiver, then you're adding a whole.
Aaron Rodgers' season is officially over, but yours has just begun at MyBookie. NFL, college ball, and a brand new cash-out system gives you options to bet and win all season long. First 2 legs of your parlay hit, cash out early and place another bet, or let it ride for a chance at an even bigger payday. Join us at MyBookie for an entire season filled with daily odd boost, same-game parlays, and huge prize pool contests. Right now, MyBookie has a no-strings-attached cash bonus that lets you deposit and withdraw quick. Use the promo code RAVENS on your first deposit of $50 or more, and you can receive up to $200 in cash instantly credited to your MyBookie account. That's promo code RAVENS to claim your cash bonus now. You can bet anything, anytime, anywhere, only with MyBookie.
Another element to the offense or the defense you don't have. You already have a pretty complete team. Let's move on to the other big names. Both, I guess we could talk about them in tandem. From the Commanders, there are 2 expiring contract edge outside linebackers, Chase Young and Montez Sweat. Chase Young, $1 million base, $4.3 million roster, full season roster bonus. Would that be split, Ken, a full season roster bonus, or does that stay with the team that had him for week one?
Well, I'm sure that the Ravens would ask for it to be taken. So you could talk about how the dollars get divided, but it's negotiable, is what I think I would say.
Because I wasn't sure about that one, but either way, that's a very minimal cost in terms of salary cap space. 24% pass rush win rate, 5 sacks for Young. I think out of all the pass rushers on the list, if you're really looking at a mercenary and the cost is pretty similar for all of them, he'd be the one I prefer.
Yes.
Sweat is at $6 million remaining on his contract for the season. 5.5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 8 tackles for loss. So he's having a good year, but a little bit more costly. Out of the big four, Hunter, Burns, Young, and Sweat, I would prefer Young for the cost, for this fit, and potentially to get the best comp pick back as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I go right along with you there. And, both those guys are going to be people who get paid. And I agree. Young, Chase is the better one. He will get a very large contract. But since the Redskins, the Commanders know this, that obviously just adds to his value right now and makes it more difficult. So he might be the one guy who gets traded at the deadline who approaches a first-round pick. It could be a first-round pick in 25, but it's not going to be anything the Ravens can afford to pay. So I think we just got to be prepared to be disappointed on that one. Again, I really don't know what I'd give, but I would be trying to defer compensation on any of these players to 25 with the big raft of free agents going out and to match up with when we have some draft capital coming back in the door, make as much of that floating as possible so they get picks at the end of the 3rd, 4th, or 5th round being the key to compensation here. And I also think there probably is something in the fact that there are 4 edge rushers available, quote unquote, that will depress the market a little bit. And it may be an opportunity for the Ravens to kind of push it. It also probably creates a situation where each of the teams, allowing one to depart is going to say, I need more because I otherwise I'm just waiting for the comp pick.
Agreed completely. Yeah. Should we move along to maybe a couple more affordable options?
Sure, absolutely.
So as we talked about in our last episode, I mentioned interior defensive line, down linemen as an area where I would potentially address or support, bolster. Brett Durbin was able to play, and everybody's playing well, but you do have some injury risk with Michael Peterson. I think if you could add one more disruptor in the middle there, this would be a really, really tough front to contend with. So the player is Danico Autry from the Tennessee Titans. They already started their sell-off with Kevin Byard earlier this week. 4 sacks, 9 quarterback hits this season. Last 3 seasons has posted 7.5, 9, and 8 sacks respectively. He is due $3.5 million remaining, plus $500,000 per game. If you could get a player like that for, say, a 5th, or maybe a 6th, that could maybe be a cherry on top piece to add to your front.
Yeah, he might be available that cheap. That would be great if Tennessee's really looking to pile up draft picks. A 5th and 25 in particular would be very reasonable. I think of Autry as an edge at this point in his career. Particularly against the Ravens, he played on the outside opposite tackle for those plays, and they have a 4-3 front. So it's a little bit different situation. He's not a guy you expect to drop to coverage. He's only done that 3 times all season. But he has done it a little bit more frequently in previous years with Tennessee, and then previous to that with Indianapolis. Not a flexibility guy though in the pass rush. Absolutely not that. He's basically a pure edge. I think he goes to the rush side, and I think honestly duplicates a lot of what the Ravens already have in Owe and Clowney and Van Noy there. Van Noy hasn't really been used as a pure Sam since he's got here. He's moved around a little bit, and they're letting Clowney play on the right side a fair amount, and Owe has been now the more common rush side linebacker since he's been back, which I like, by the way. But I think he's going to be competing for playing time on that rush side, whereas if they could pick up somebody who has a little bit of a Sam background, that might be the area where I'd look. Okay.
Carl Lawson, Any idea how many snaps he's dropped? I don't think very many. He's more your leveraged bull rusher, gets low to the ground, 7 sacks in 22. Last year, redid his deal because the Jets just drafted over him after giving him a big payday. So he's been a healthy scratch most of the season. And
I was going to say he's not playing at all. When he has played, he hasn't been very good. If he'd be a great bargain bin type of guy. And I think what we could see, and this is something Michael Pierce, I think, has been very good. And Matabike has been outstanding. And you want to keep Matabike in on third down. You probably want relief for Matabike on early downs because he's played 67% of the snaps now. And I do not think that is going to work out. So there's 2 ways to do that. You can get an interior lineman, in which case I like Ndamukong Suh still. I think he's the guy who they can fit in seamlessly because he can play the 1, he can play the 3. And frankly, the Ravens are flexible enough with Travis Jones coming out this week and having a real big game to move guys around and switch guys from 3 to 5, like Washington, if Urban was lost for some reason, to have 3 noses on the team. If you want to think about it that way, I'm kind of air quoting that, would be a way you'd add Sue, who probably still honestly is best at the 3 tech and being allowed to penetrate. I really like him as an addition. I think he'd be very cheap, under $3 million, I would think. Yeah.
I think he was vet minimal with Philly last year.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. Well, he's primed and he wants a championship. I mean, it seems like that's the deal you make happen. That you're not even limited to the trade deadline. Obviously you can wait and see, but then other teams can as well. I think if you sign Sue this week, you're probably addressing a need on the team that might arise, but it's a depth need on the team. And I think you might go into these games with 6 defensive linemen active because you can drop a corner with what the kind of depth the Ravens have had this year. It does weaken your special teams a little bit, but it allows you to spread those snaps much more effectively on the inside between other linemen. And one other point to make about this is that the other way you can reduce defensive line snaps is by having Michael Pierce be replaced on passing downs by a kicked inside edge rusher. And Autry, we've seen Clowney in that role already some. We've seen Van Noy rush some from the inside. And these edge guys, some of them maybe are going to be most effective on the outside, but I think the Ravens have options to move people inside if they need to and go back to more of these rush nickel looks where they have 3 outside linebackers on the field.
Yeah, I would like to see that for sure. That's been a potent alignment for the Ravens over the years. And talking through this and looking through these options, especially pass rushers, Ndamukong Suh would probably be the very top of my list. And best of all, he doesn't cost you a draft pick.
There you go. Anybody else? Is there a wide receiver out there that you think fits the Ravens' need?
The only wide receiver that caught my eye is Darnell Mooney, who's a speedster from Chicago, entering the last year of his rookie contract. And I don't think you need another possession target. If anything, you need one more field stretcher injury insurance.
Okay. Well, he's an interesting choice. Now, Mooney, I believe, is the guy who caught the touchdown to put the Bears ahead in the 2021 game and then didn't take a knee inside the 5-yard line, which would have virtually guaranteed the Bears the win, and instead scored. Yep. Didn't have the field presence for that. Roquan Smith would have yelled at him after having the field presence, to make that late tackle. But anyway,
he may have.
Yeah. So that's a case where he's a guy. I'm not that excited about him, but you're right. I think the field stretching characteristics are what you want, and the hesitancy to use Flowers for that, and the absence now of Duvernay kind of really concerned me. With the Ravens getting Tylan Wallace back, the group being largely healthy at this point, not as productive as they'd like, but largely healthy. Do you think that's a position that the Ravens might try and address either through trade or FA pickup?
No, I don't. I think that they may try to address it via trade in the offseason, looking forward to next season. But I don't think that's a need on this team right now at all. Maybe the deepest position on the roster, to be honest.
Okay. All right, well, one guy I want to talk about is, a guy who always has piqued my interest in terms of the past. That's an offensive line hopeful, Michael Onwenu of the Patriots. The reason I like him so much is that he has played all over in that Patriots scheme. He's played tackle spots, and I believe he's played tackle on both sides. Originally drafted as a guard out of Michigan. And if you remember that guard, they had Ruiz, the center, who went to New Orleans. They had Bredesen, the left guard, went to us. And Onwenu was actually the third guy. He didn't go until pick 182. And he was the guy of the three I liked by far the most. I was so upset at getting at the Patriots picking up a value selection like that at 182. And then he ends up being this incredible, versatile NFL lineman. Now, the one thing I have heard about him from Patriots people doing Know Your Foe episodes and other people who talk about him is that Onwenu is not a heady player, that he makes a lot of on-field mistakes, and he kind of is
like an Ower, like a Michael Orr or something like that.
There you go, like a Michael Orr, maybe a Jared Gaither. Jared Gaither is more of a work ethic situation, I think, than a intelligence thing. But anyway, the Onwenu was a guy who, if you're talking about offensive linemen, you're talking about trying to pick up a rental, and you may be even talking about a guy you could sign after this year, because I don't think he'll be that expensive. I think he'd be a very interesting choice, and I think the Patriots are still sellers right now.
Yes, I don't think that game against Buffalo changes their outlook too much. Onwenu, it would be my top offensive lineman if available, and apparently he is. I saw a report from, I think it was NBC Sports, that said Onwenu and Kyle Duggar and one of their other defenders. They're looking to
Kyle Duggar. There's another interesting name.
Yeah,
want to pick up a safety and.
He's just a Hamilton clone. A little redundant with Hamilton, I would say. But the other offensive lineman that Zaribek threw out was Cody Whitehair of the Bears. Looked into his contract. He's due $10 million base next season, so I think that probably takes him off the table.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, when you're talking about who they can sign for next year, they're going to be very judicious with the dollars they have. And I'm always that way anyway, but they've spent so much of next year's salary on Beckham and these other void year players.
$23 million, I think, right?
That's I don't know the number, but I'll take your word for it. It's a lot. I mean, a lot of it is right there from Beckham. So what they do next year is going to obviously be very tightly controlled, and I'd rather have some fiscal austerity here that allows them to roll back the amount of void year money they have. So they're not, if it's $23 million next year, could we get it down to $10 million the following year? I know there's going to be some restructuring. I know coming out of COVID, a lot of teams dipped into the void money cookie jar to basically fund or put things on the credit card. I just don't like it, and I want the Ravens to return to more cap flexibility. Already, their 3-year cap outlook is one of the worst in the National Football League. I know something Brad Spielberger did, and he was on the show. It put him at 27th of 32 teams in terms of 3-year cap outlook.
Yeah, so not great. We want to extend this Super Bowl window open as long as possible, or whether you consider it a window or not, you want to be extended as long as possible. So, yeah, you don't need to have the number one roster in the NFL, top 5 roster with some playoff variants, and you're hosting Lombardi.
Any other player that comes to mind as being a guy that or has been discussed as being a guy who the Ravens might want?
One other player, I guess, would be Jalen Johnson, the Bears corner. Now that the cornerback room seems to have a wealth of riches, probably not as appealing, but knock on wood, you never know when that situation changes. He's on his rookie deal, $1.5 million through the rest of the year. He's 2 interceptions this year. Get this, Ken, 4.6 yards per target allowed this season. So
that's terrific. Yeah.
Very good. So he'd be a guy that you would maybe say, okay, this is going to be we're going to bring him in and then re-sign him, and he's going to be our CB2 long term. But now with Brandon Stevens' emergence, I don't think you necessarily need to do that.
Right. Yeah, it would kind of be the cheap year 4 coming out of Stevens. I don't think the time is exactly right for that. I've got one other in the mailbag that's here, and it's an interesting one because it's an old name, and really, what would they bring back for this guy? But Hollywood Brown is having a pretty good year. Is there any price at which the Ravens would want him back? Obviously, be only for this year because he's on his 5th-year option. He'll then be a free agent. What might the Ravens be willing to offer?
think that ship has sailed. It's if player requests a trade away and then you trade for him back. I don't know if I've ever seen that one. I mean, if they needed a receiver, I think he's a good player. He's a day 2. He'd be worth a day 2 pick, but they just don't need a receiver. And even Lamar at the podium yesterday wasn't as warm and friendly with Hollywood as maybe you would have thought.
Okay. All right. I have to go back and listen to that interview. That's it. That's interesting to hear. I thought friend of Lamar might actually carry some weight with him potentially returning. And it would be an interesting thing that you trade him away for effectively a high second round pick. I think in terms of the difference in the value of the picks exchange, it's actually complex because they traded, first and then they traded back. But it's it would be an interesting reunion. And I think you're right that once the player wants out of Baltimore, I can't recall a situation where they've come back. It's usually the player who's just extremely positive about the organization, says, I really love my time here. I respect the organization, everything they do. I understand the need for this move. Cutting me usually is what it is.
Pernell McPhee or Tony Jefferson, somebody like that.
Yeah.
Where it's the team that decides to move on, and then it's the team that decides to bring them back. I don't think they like to be dictated to.
Yeah. Very good. Very good. Bradley Bozeman probably might also be in that camp in terms of turning down what I think was probably a very fair offer, and he ended up getting less on the market from Carolina. And I still don't think the Ravens would be interested in bringing it back. Would be my guess. Yeah.
Not with Linderbaum around.
Yeah. All right. Always a pleasure doing this show with you, Vas. Tell people where they can talk football with you online, where they can find your work.
Sure. My pleasure, Ken. I am at Vasilis Beatdown on Twitter, Vasilis Beatdown. I am a editor and writer for Baltimore Beatdown blog. And I also have a new podcast with URE called The Ravens Way Pod. You can find us on Twitter at Ravens Way Pod. We stream live on YouTube every Thursday between 6 and 7, try to lead into the Thursday night game. So enjoying that. But this all should be a pretty fun week. We'll see what kind of moves DeCosta makes. I would probably anticipate a small move for a day 3 pick, just to kind of give you a little bit more depth at the place where DeCosta might feel that he needs a little bit extra.
Right. I'll be excited about it and be even more excited if they go ahead and they sign Sue and they find out they have a healthy player who can give them a little more depth. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a film study short, hit me up. DMs are always open. Any new thought experiment, ideas you have for how the roster ought to be worked, scheme, whatever you have. And all I will say is try and keep the idea small. The idea is we're getting a 15 to 30-minute episode and providing some shorter film study content that will hopefully get people in on this for the first time, as opposed to seeing an hour episode and wondering, I don't want to listen to that. It's too long. But anyway, really appreciate you folks and your contributions to this. Please hit me up. I'll get back to you very quickly. For Vas Laricos, this is Ken McCusick saying goodbye. We'll see you we'll talk to you next time on Friday Morning GM.